Joining us right now is former Defense and Economic Minister under Angela Merkel, KT Guttenberg. KT, good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
What's your take on all of this? Can Tillerson lead the U.S. allies in a united front against Russia to put the pressure on Russia, to put the pressure on Syria?
I do see a lot of coherence within the G7 group at the very moment. So there was, and that's a typical European reaction, there was silent approval after the attack last week. But what I've heard in Germany, I was there just over the weekend, was that they said, okay, it was a forceful, but it was a well-measured step. And that's the reaction you hear all across Europe right now. And I think G7 will be, the G7 group, which used to be G8 with Russia, and we have G7 now, will have a clear message towards Russia. And how cynical do you have to be to speak of red lines as a Russian government that has crossed every single red line for the last couple of years? I always said they actually went from red lines to red carpets when it comes to Syria and Damascus. So the point I'd like to make here, I actually also think they actually stepped into a trap last week. And it was the first week and also some kind of awkward reaction from Putin when he said these strikes are actually violating international law. Yes, he was correct with that. But coming out of the mouth of someone who has continuously supported the violation of international law, who has broken international law in eastern Ukraine, other places with Crimea, and someone who has blocked every single resolution against someone who was slaughtering his own people, is, for me, the incarnate of cynicism. And that led even more, I think, to a united front within G7. And that's what we have to see for the next days to come.
What's the clear message? You say a clear message will be coming out of this. What is the message to Russia?
So the message has to be, what the clear message will be is another question, but it has to be that that solutions have to be found with a wider group than just Russia, the G7, and maybe with or without Assad. That's one of the things which is still unclear also coming from the US. I have to be blunt here as well. The signals we got from the White House and from the Secretary of State and from the NSC were not coherent in the last few days. Sometimes it was with Assad, and it was without Assad again. Then the question was, is Russia the one we have to embrace for a solution or not?
Yeah.
So that has to be the clear message at the end of the day. Will it
you
be
don't
with
see a
Russia
clear message coming out of the U.S.?
Not yet.
Well, do you
not
think,
yet.
I mean, okay, but I would say that administrations, this one, the previous one, any administration has to be able to adjust its strategy based on the realities on the ground, right? That's just the way the world works.
Absolutely.
So, but do you find it odd or interesting or perhaps, I mean, even disingenuous, this is speaking to your point that you just made, that some of the folks up on Capitol Hill, our U.S. politicians, are now full of angst and banging on about the fact that after 75 days, there's no clear strategy on Syria, when most of these politicians have been in office for the entire period of strife in Syria, and clearly there was no strategy or anything coherent previously.
That's quite a typical reaction coming from the legislative body against the executive body.
I've
been through that for quite a while. So, but they have a point on one hand. On the other hand, it's just 75 days in office. We still have a lack of positions in the State Department and other places, which is, of course, a weakness right now. And if you look at the protagonists, Nikki Haley tries her best, but she doesn't have a foreign policy background.
Yeah. But we should point out the president did get broad global support.
He did, immediately, and I personally have to say as well, it was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
It was the right thing to do, and it was then interesting also to measure and to see the reaction specifically coming from Europe, because Europeans would be the first to say, whoa, come on, please don't do anything in that regard. And most of them said, okay, that was necessary. It has crossed the line, not only one line, but many. Then again, of course, you would have some who would say, it needed 80 plus whatever victims with a chemical attack to finally act decisively. But we have lost 400,000 in the last couple of years, and actually nothing happened.
That actually goes back to the Obama administration with the red line and then the subsequent chemical weapons attacks after that. Exactly. And they chose diplomacy. over military action, where they left Russia essentially responsible for removing the chemical weapons from Syria, which didn't happen.
But I see this, I keep hearing about this over the past few days, about this idea that, well, okay, well, we did this because of the chemical weapons, but are we going to allow him to use conventional weapons? But the reality is, you've got to separate these things out to some degree. You cannot allow, again, the use of chemical weapons and just not take action. And I understand that he then uses the same airbase for conventional weapons. But we should be smart enough to be able to separate these issues out and understand, well, yes, we have to tackle but at the same time, you can't normalize chemical weapons.
And the complexity goes way further. It is not just a question of how to deal with the use of chemical weapons now and in the future. And that's one of the things I think where the G7 group, and as you have asked, where do we go and what could be the message, where we have to go way further. It is about the wider region. It is about the question how to deal with Iran in the future, with Hezbollah that have their fingers in it. It is about the question, what does it mean if we do, yes or no, have Assad as part of the solution, but if you, for instance, kick him out of any solution right now, and we have just heard the news about refugees in Germany and Germans not being willing to accept more refugees.
Right.
In a solution without Assad, you might have 2 million Alawites seeking refuge or seeking asylum in Europe within the near future.
And if you take Assad down, does that embolden Iran? Right? So it's all this chess game of, what happens to Syria impacts Russia's influence versus Iran's influence in the region. Isn't that right?
Yeah, it's body influence, Turkey's influence. So it has levels and sub-levels of complexity that we haven't dealt with.